"Find her," said the Duke of Chaperone, and slapped the pamphlet down on his solicitor's desk hard enough to rattle the inkstand. "I do not care what it costs. Find me the man who writes as a wren and bring him to me, and I shall know how to deal with him." Mr. Pethick regarded the pamphlet with the caution of a man regarding a wasp. "Your Grace has read it, then?" "I have read all of them. 11 numbers. 11. Silas Thorne, 5th Duke of Chaperone, went to the window and stood with his back to the room, because he did not trust his own face. "There is a description in that one of a lead mine in the fold, my fold Pethick, my valley, where the water stands 18 inches in the lower gallery, and the boys who bring the ore up are paid by weight, and therefore do not stop to eat. It is exact. It is dated. It gives the depth of the water and the name of the overseer, and the amount of the fine levied on a man for coughing. A libel, Your Grace, may be answered." "It is not a libel," said Silas. "That is the entire difficulty. It is true, every word of it, and I did not know it, and the whole of the North has known it since Michaelmas, and the man who wrote it did not once in 11 numbers put my name to it." Pethick's pen stopped. "He might have," said Duke. "He had every right to. It is my valley, and my ore, and my name on the lease, and he could have hanged me in print in every coffee house from here to the coast, and been applauded for it. Instead he wrote. Where is it? He wrote. The fault here is not one man's wickedness, but every man's inattention, and inattention may be cured, and I write in the belief that it may." He turned round. "Nobody has ever paid me a compliment in my life that I resented so much, or deserved so little." "And when we find him, Your Grace?" "I shall drain the mine," said Silas. "I have drained it. It was done in November. I have turned off the overseer. I have altered the reckoning from weight to hours, and I have had the lower gallery timbered by men brought from the coast at a cost I do not care to name in front of you, because you would faint." He picked up the pamphlet again. "And then I shall find a wren, and I shall put the whole of the Chaperone estate into his hands and say, 'Tell me what else I have not seen.' 9 months. 9 months of inquiry, of letters to printers, of a very expensive man in London who came back with nothing at all. The pamphlets came from a jobbing press in a market town 12 miles from Chaperone. The printer, a stubborn old radical named Vosper, had been offered £50, and had been threatened with the law, and had been visited at last by the Duke himself, who had sat in his ink-smelling parlour for an hour, and had come away liking him extremely and knowing nothing. "I've give my word, Your Grace," Vosper had said, "and my word is the only thing I own that don't wear out. Tell him this, and it is not a threat, and he may do as he likes with it. Tell him the water is out of the lower gallery. Tell him the boys are paid by the hour. And tell him that the Duke of Chaperone has read every word he ever wrote twice, and would give a great deal to shake his hand." The old man's eyes had gone very bright. "I'll tell him," he said, "that I will." And a fortnight later the 12th number appeared, and it said in the last paragraph, "The great man of the fold has done, in one season, what 40 years of petitioning could not accomplish. Let it be known." He did not do it to be praised. He did it because he was ashamed, and shame that acts is the most useful virtue in England. Silas had read that at his own breakfast table and had found himself unable to eat, and had gone out and walked 6 miles in the rain like a boy of 19. 9 months and no name and nothing, and by June the search had begun to be less a matter of gratitude and more a matter of a man's peace of mind. He would have said, if pressed, that he wished to thank the writer. He was aware, in the corner of his mind where a man keeps the things he does not examine, that he had begun to think of a wren rather too often, that he had begun to argue with him in his head while riding, that he had found himself, in the middle of a dull dinner, composing sentences for the pleasure of a stranger's approval. He had never had a friend who told him the truth. That was the plain shape of it. Dukes do not. Everything a duke hears has been rounded off before it reaches him. So when his aunt wrote to say that she expected him at Ilbury for the midsummer party, and that she had assembled the most agreeable young people in 3 counties, and would be obliged if he would not sulk in the library, Silas Thorne went, because Vosper's press was 11 miles from Ilbury. And because a man will clutch at anything, he was in a foul temper by the 2nd evening, and it was in that temper that he first failed to notice Prudence Ashby. She was sitting in the corner of his aunt's drawing-room with a work-bag, exactly where a chaperone sits, and she was so entirely the furniture of the scene that his eye passed over her 3 times in an hour and registered nothing but grey stuff and a plain cap. "Who is that?" he said at last, and only because his aunt had run out of nieces to describe. Lady Ilbury did not even look. "That? Oh, Miss Ashby. She sits with the Denniker girls. A very good sort of creature. Her father was a schoolmaster at Renford and left her nothing but books, poor thing, and she has been with the Dennikers 4 years. A slight, comfortable sigh. She is 27 and there is an end of it. She reads a great deal, I believe." "Ah," said Silas, and forgot her again inside a minute, and would remember that minute afterwards with a shame that had teeth in it. He noticed her the first time, because she laughed. It was the 4th evening. Young Mr. Denniker had been holding forth for a quarter of an hour on the improvement of the labouring poor, a subject upon which he held views and possessed no facts, and had concluded that what the working man chiefly wanted was moral instruction. "He does not want bread," Silas had said, more savagely than the drawing-room expected. "He wants nothing but a homily. You are quite right. It is a great mercy, Mr. Denniker, that homilies are so cheap. A man may have 100 weight of them for nothing, and they will keep him warm all winter." There was a horrified silence of the kind that follows a duke into most rooms, and from the corner, very softly, somebody laughed. He turned his head. The chaperone in the grey stuff gown was looking with great attention at her work-bag, and her needle was going, and her face was perfectly grave, but her shoulders had not quite stopped, and there was a dimple at the corner of her mouth that she was doing her best to put away. Silas Thorne looked at her for perhaps 3 seconds. Then his aunt spoke, and the room resumed, and the moment closed over like water. He noticed her the second time because of the mine. It was in the garden after dinner, and the talk had turned, as it will, when there is a duke to be flattered, to the great improvement in the fold, and Sir Marcus Denniker was assuring the company that of course such abuses were much exaggerated by pamphleteers, who were paid by the line and had every interest in horror. "It was not exaggerated," said Silas. "It was understated. Your Grace is generous." "I am accurate. The water in the lower gallery was 18 inches. The pamphlet said 18 inches. I stood in it." Sir Marcus laughed uneasily. "Your Grace has never been down a mine." "I have been down that one," said the Duke of Harrowden, "in November for 2 hours, and I recommend it to any gentleman who believes that abuses are exaggerated." And behind him, quietly, from the group of ladies going in, a voice he did not know said, 19. He turned so sharply that a woman near him gasped. Miss Ashby had stopped on the gravel. She had a shawl over her arm and the Denniker girls at her back, and she was looking at him with an expression of pure, undisguised horror at having spoken at all. "I beg your pardon," said Silas. "What did you say?" "Nothing, Your Grace," she curtsied. "I beg your pardon, I spoke out of turn. You said 19. I said nothing, Your Grace, Miss Ashby." He came down the step. He was aware of every eye in the garden and did not care in the least. The pamphlet said 18 inches. "You said 19. Why?" And Prudence Ashby, a schoolmaster's daughter of 27 in a grey stuff gown, with no protector, no money, and no name worth a candle in that garden, lifted her chin and looked the Duke of Harrowden in the eye because, she said, "If the water stood at 18 inches in the spring, Your Grace, it would stand deeper after the November rains, and it did. And I have been told that the pamphleteer took the lower figure because he did not wish to be accused of exaggeration by gentlemen who had never stood in it." The garden was extremely quiet. "You have been told," said Silas slowly. "One hears a great deal," said Miss Ashby in a corner, and she curtsied again and gathered the Denniker girls and went in. Silas Thorne stood on the gravel in the blue midsummer dusk and felt the whole architecture of his understanding shift, very slightly, like a stone in a wall when the frost has been at it. He watched her for the rest of that evening, and what he saw made him ashamed of every drawing-room he had ever stood in, including his own. The party played at cards. Miss Ashby did not. She sat behind Miss Denniker's chair with the work-bag, and was sent in the space of 1 hour for a shawl, for a fan that was already on the table, for a second candle, and with a laugh that the whole room joined in, for Miss Denniker's little dog, who had gone into the shrubbery and did not wish to come out. She was gone 11 minutes. It had begun to rain. She came back with the dog and with the shoulders of her grey gown dark with wet, and she set the dog in its mistress's lap and returned to the corner, and nobody thanked her, and nobody moved a screen so that she might dry, and nobody in that room thought for one instant that anything had occurred at all. Silas Thorne, who had turned off an overseer for fining a man for cuffing, sat at a card table with the ace of hearts in his hand and did not know where to look. Your play, your grace, Sir Marcus. He played badly and lost and did not notice. He had thought himself a reformed man. He had drained a mine. He had stood in 19.5 inches of water, 18, he had believed at the time, and had come up in a rage of shame that had lasted 9 months and had cost him £11,000, and he had believed, in the private accounting of his soul, that he had settled with the world. And here in his aunt's warm, bright drawing room, with the rain on the windows, a woman was sitting wet in a corner, because 40 years of England had agreed that she was a piece of furniture, and he had passed his eyes over her 3 times and seen a grey gown. Inattention, A. Wren had written, may be cured. He got up from the card table in the middle of a hand. Your Grace, said Lady Ilbury. Miss Ashby, said the Duke of Harrowden, and every head in the room turned, and he saw her go rigid in the corner, is soaked to the shoulder, and there is a fire, and there are 11 people between her and it. I am going to move that screen. I would be obliged if somebody would give her a chair. There was an appalled silence. Then Lady Ilbury, who was a woman of the world and understood in 1 second that a duke had chosen his ground, said smoothly, good gracious, so she is. Prudence, my dear, come to the fire at once. Somebody has been very careless. And she looked at her own niece, who had gone the colour of her ribbons. Miss Ashby came to the fire because she could not do anything else. She sat on the edge of the chair with her back straight and her hands folded and her face burning, and she did not look at him once. And Silas understood too late, in the way that men of his rank are always too late, that he had not rescued her. He had exposed her. He had made her a scene in a room where her whole living depended upon never being won. He had done it out of anger, and the anger had been for himself, and she had paid for it. He went to bed at midnight and did not go to bed. He shut the door of his room and turned up the lamp and took from his portmanteau a flat leather case that his valet believed to contain papers of state, 12 numbers, stitched, worn, annotated in his own hand in the margins, carried from Harrowden to Ilbury as another man carries a portrait. He read them again. He read them until 3, and this time he read them the way one reads a letter from someone he loves, not for the argument, but for the person. And the person was everywhere, and he had never once seen her. The 11th number quoted Latin, and then apologized for quoting it. I beg the reader's pardon. My father taught it to me, and it comes upon me still like the smell of his coat. The 7th spoke of the school in the fold, and of the drunkard, and said, I do not blame the man. I blame the parish that gave a school to one who could not spell obligation, when it might have had, and there the sentence stopped, and began again, and went on about the roof. And Silas sat on the edge of his bed at 3 in the morning with the paper in both hands and finished the sentence himself, and put his face down into his hands. The 4th number on the fining of the miners was in a fury from beginning to end. And there was one line in it that he had read perhaps 40 times in 9 months and had never understood at all until that night. And he understood it now entirely, and it went through him like the cold. They will bear a great deal, these people, and they will be told they bear it well. And being told so is the last indignity, for a creature that is praised for its patience has been informed that patience is all that is required of it. He turned the page over. The ink had blotted at the foot of it, faintly, where a hand had rested, a small hand, resting where a small hand rests at the left, holding the paper flat. He sat there a long while with the lamp burning down. He thought about a corner, and a workbag, and 11 minutes in the rain for a dog. He did not sleep, and at 6 in the morning he was in the library at Ilbury, and so was she. She was up a set of steps in a grey gown with her cap crooked, and she had 4 volumes under one arm, and when the door opened she looked down and went perfectly white. Your Grace. Do not come down, said Silas. You will drop them, and I shall have to catch you, and then we shall both be in the newspapers. Miss Ashby did not laugh. She came down the steps very carefully, and put the books on the table, and stood with her hands folded in the exact attitude of a woman who has been trained by 4 years of drawing rooms to be invisible on demand. He looked at the books, an old bound volume of the statutes. A treatise on the drainage of mines, 2 others, and one of them, when he turned it over, was in French and was about the ventilation of galleries. These are not novels, he said. No, Your Grace. Miss Ashby, who reads these? They belong to the library, Your Grace. Lady Ilbury permits me the use of it. That is not what I asked you. She said nothing. He could see her pulse going in her throat. Silas Thorne, who had been feared in 3 counties since he was 25, sat down, deliberately, in a low chair, so that he should not be standing over her, and put his hands on his knees. I am going to tell you something, he said, and I am going to tell it to you badly, because I am not a clever man and I have had no sleep. For 9 months I have been hunting a writer. He signs himself A. Wren. He has done more good in my valley in 1 year than I have done in my whole life, and he has never asked me for a penny, and he has never once used my name to make himself famous. I have offered money for his name. I have offered a great deal of money. I have been to Vosper's press 4 times and been thrown out of it twice, more or less politely, by a printer whom I now regard as the most honourable man in England. He watched her face and it did not move at all, which told him everything. And last night, said Silas, in my aunt's garden a chaperone in a corner corrected me on the depth of the water in my own mine, and got it right. Prudence Ashby looked at the table. If a woman, she said at last, very carefully, were to write such things, hypothetically, Your Grace, she would be ruined, not for the writing, for the impertinence. She would lose her place within the hour, and no family in 3 counties would take her, and she would have precisely nothing. She lifted her eyes. That is not modesty. It is arithmetic. It is the same arithmetic that keeps a mine's water at 18 inches. I am aware of it. With respect, Your Grace, you are not. You have never in your life been obliged to consider what a single sentence might cost you. It was the truest thing anyone had said to him in 20 years, and she had said it in a whisper at 6 in the morning with a crooked cap. No, said Silas. I have not. He stood up. Then let me say this, and you may deny it as often as you please, and I shall not press you again, and no word of it will leave this room. He put the pamphlet on the table, number 11, worn soft, carried in his breast for 9 months like a love letter, which he had not until that instant admitted to himself. If you are Wren, you should know that the water is out of the lower gallery, and that the boys are paid by the hour, and that the overseer is dismissed, and that a man of 40 who thought himself a decent landlord has learned to be ashamed, and is glad of it. Miss Ashby put out one hand and touched the pamphlet with the tips of 2 fingers, the way one touches something that has been thought lost. And if you are not, said Silas, then I have made a great fool of myself in front of a lady who reads French, and I shall depend upon her charity. She looked up at him, and for one moment, the invisible woman in the grey gown was not there at all, and in her place stood somebody entirely different, bright-eyed and frightened and blazing. How is the fold? She said. Truly, not as your steward tells it. How is the fold? Wet in March, said Silas. There are 9 cottages I would not put a horse in. The school has 41 children and 1 master, and he is a drunkard, and I have not turned him off because I have nobody to put in his place, and I am told there is no schoolmistress in England who would come to a valley like that for the money I can honestly offer. He heard himself say it, and he heard half a second later what he had said, and he looked at the daughter of the schoolmaster of Renford. The clock on the library mantel ticked 11 times before either of them spoke. That, said Prudence Ashby unsteadily, was very badly done, Your Grace. It was not done at all, said Silas. I did not know I was doing it. She did not answer him. She took up her 4 books and her work-bag and went to the door, and there she stopped with her back to him and said, in a low, fierce voice that he would remember for the rest of his life, 18 inches was a lie. It was 19.5. I lowered it because I knew that if I wrote the truth, some gentleman in a garden would call me an exaggerator, and the boys would go on standing in it while he did, and she went out. He did not follow her, which cost him more than draining the mine. He went instead at 9, and rode 11 miles to Vosper's press, and stood in the ink-smelling parlour with his hat in his hand. I know, he said. The old printer looked at him for a long moment over his spectacles. Then you know more than you ought, he said, and less than you think. Tell me the rest. Not for £50. I am not offering £50, said the Duke of Harrowden. I am offering to be told what a fool I am at length by a man who has earned the right, and to stand here and take it. Vosper set down his composing stick. She were 15, he said, when her father died. He were the best schoolmaster in the north, and he learned her Latin and French and figures, and when he died the parish took the school and put a man in it who couldn't spell obligation, and she went for a governess because there weren't nothing else. 4 year with the Denikers. Sits in a corner, eats after the family, he wiped his hands. She come to me the first time with a paper in her hand and her heart going that hard I could see it in her throat, and she says, Mr. Vosper, will you print this if I pay you out of my own money and never say my name? And I read it. The old man's jaw worked. I've printed 40 year, your grace. I never read anything like it. Where did she get the money? Where do you think, said Vosper. £20 a year. She paid me out of it, every number, and she wouldn't take a penny back when the numbers sold, and they sold 400 of the 11th, and I've the money in a box upstairs and she won't have it. Silas stood very still. She goes down there, you know, said Vosper. Down where? The fold. On her half days, walks it, 11 mile there and 11 back in her boots, and them not good boots. That's how she had the water. She went down the ladder into the lower gallery herself with a candle in November, past the water, and stood in it up to here. He struck himself across the thigh, and measured it with a school rule she brought in her pocket, and come up and wrote it down. He put his spectacles back on. That's your A, Wren, your grace. 19.5 inches. She had the fever after it for a month. The Duke of Harrowden put out a hand and took hold of the back of a chair. She had the fever, he repeated. Aye. And nobody sent for a physician. Who'd send for one, said Vosper, not unkindly, for a governess. Silas rode back to Ilbury at a pace that frightened his groom, and went straight through his aunt's hall in his boots, and was informed by a startled footman that the party had gone to the ruins at Cordon and would not be back before 6. He waited. It was the longest afternoon of his life. And at 5:30, when they came back laughing in 3 carriages, with parasols and picnic baskets and Miss Deniker's bonnet ruined by a wasp, he stood at the top of the steps at Ilbury and watched a schoolmaster's daughter get down last from the last carriage, carrying somebody else's shawl and somebody else's sketching block and somebody else's dropped glove, in a grey stuff gown with a plain cap, invisible, the most remarkable person in the north of England, fetching a glove. Miss Ashby, said the Duke of Harrowden, in a voice that stopped every conversation in the sweep. She looked up. Would you do me the very great honour, he said, of walking with me? She walked. She had, he was aware, no earthly choice. That was the first thing he would have to undo. They went down through the yew walk in silence, and when they were out of sight of the house he stopped and said, You may go back at once if you wish, and I will tell my aunt that I detained you and that you did your best to escape me. You are not obliged to hear a word of this. I am a paid companion, your grace, said Prudence, and you are a duke, and you have called me out in front of the whole party, and I shall be examined about it by 3 ladies before supper. Do not pretend that I have a choice. It is unkind, and you are not unkind. He took that. It hurt, and he took it. You went down the ladder, he said, in November. She went perfectly still, with a candle, past the water, with a school rule in your pocket. Vosper had no right. Vosper told me nothing for 9 months and £50, said Silas, and told me everything this morning for nothing at all, 'cause I went to him with my hat in my hand and asked to be told what a fool I was. Miss Ashby, you were ill for a month afterwards and no one sent for a physician, and I have not been able to think of anything else since 10 o'clock this morning, and I am not accustomed to being unable to think, and I find that I do not much care. The yews stood black and silent. She had her hands gripped together in front of her. It had to be measured, she said. Yes. They said 18 inches was hysteria. If I had written what a boy told me, they would have called it hearsay, and if I had written what I guessed, they would have called it invention, and while they argued the boys stood in it. So it had to be measured, and I could not send anybody down in my place, because if a man had been seen doing it he would have been turned off and his family would have starved. She lifted her chin. Nobody turns off a governess for going for a walk. It was the only advantage I had of being nothing, your grace, and I used it, and I would use it again tomorrow. You are not nothing. I am extremely nothing, said Prudence Ashby. It is a fact, not a grievance. I have £20 a year and a character, and if I lose the character I have £20. Then take mine, said Silas. She stopped breathing. He heard it. I have made a great many stupid speeches in my life, he said, in the Lords chiefly, where they are encouraged. And this will be the worst of them, and I am going to make it anyway, because I have been reading you for a year and I have not been able to answer, and I find I have a very great deal to say. He turned to face her in the green dark of the yew walk. When I began to look for A. Wren, I wanted to shake his hand. Then I wanted his advice. Then, and I am ashamed of it, but I will have no lies between us ever, I began to want his good opinion more than I ever wanted anything in my life, and I did not understand why. And I sat at dinners full of the handsomest girls in 3 counties and composed sentences in my head for a stranger, and thought myself half mad. He drew a breath, and then a woman in a corner laughed at my joke about homilies, and I did not look at her. Miss Ashby, I have been in the same house with you for 5 days, and I did not look at you, and my aunt told me you were 27, and there was an end of it. And I said and I turned away. That is what I am. That is exactly what your pamphlets are about, and I am the thing you were writing against, and I did it in a drawing room and never felt it. Your Grace, Silas, he said. My name is Silas. Nobody has used it in 11 years, and I should like to hear it before you refuse me. Prudence Ashby put a hand over her mouth. I am not asking you, he went on more roughly, because you are clever, though you are the cleverest person I have ever met, and I include every man I have ever sat beside in Parliament. I am not asking you because I need a schoolmistress in the fold, and I am wretchedly sorry that I said that in the library, because it was the most graceless thing I have ever said to a woman, and I would give a good deal to have it back. He stopped. He realized, shaking. I am asking you because you went down a ladder in the dark, alone, with a school rule, and told the truth about my valley, and did not put my name to it, and because you have a dimple at the corner of your mouth that you put away when you think anybody is looking. And I want the rest of my life to be spent in the effort of getting it out again. Somewhere beyond the yews, a blackbird was going through its whole repertory entirely unaware. You will be laughed at, said Prudence, in a small voice. Almost certainly. They will say she was the chaperone. They will say you might have had any woman in England and you took the creature in the corner. They will, Silas agreed. And in about a year, when the 20th number of A. Wren appears, and it is the finest thing published in this country, and the whole of London wants to know who wrote it, I shall have the exquisite pleasure of saying nothing at all, and going home, and having supper with my wife. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else, and turned away and put both hands against the trunk of a yew tree as though the world had tilted. I have imagined this, she said. I want you to know that. I have imagined it in a way that no woman in my position has any business imagining anything, and I told myself it was because I had made you up out of a valley and a set of accounts, and that the real man would be. Her shoulders shook. And then you stood in the garden and said it was understated, and I could not breathe. Silas Thorne did not touch her. He stood 2 feet away in the yew walk with his hands at his sides and let her decide, because a man who has spent 9 months chasing a stranger's approval learns, in the end, what it is worth and how it must be given. Say it, he said, whatever it is. You have never in your life been afraid to write it down. Say it to my face and I will take it. And if it is no, I will drive you to Vosper's in the morning and buy him a new press and never trouble you again. Prudence Ashby turned round. Her cap was crooked, her face was wet, her chin was up. Silas, she said, the school in the fold has 41 children and 1 drunkard, and the 9 cottages will want more than paint. And the ventilation of the upper gallery is worse than the water ever was, and nobody has looked at it, because it does not drown anybody quickly enough to be interesting. She drew a breath that shook the whole of her. I should like to begin on Tuesday. Is that a yes? It is a list, said A. Wren. You will find they amount to the same thing. He laughed helplessly, entirely, the way he had not laughed since his father died, and put out his hand, and she put hers into it, ink-stained, chapped at the knuckles, small and quite steady. He raised it to his lips. Behind them, distantly, from the terrace at Ilbury, somebody dropped a glass. They were married in September at the little church in the fold, because she would not be married anywhere else, and half the valley came in its boots. Old Vosper gave her away and wept into a printer's rag and told everyone within earshot that he had known all along and had never said a word, which was true and which he was permitted to say exactly once a year thereafter. Lady Ilbury told 3 counties that she had made the match herself. The 13th number of A Wren appeared at Christmas on the ventilation of upper galleries and was reprinted in London, and was quoted in the Lords in February by a duke who rose to support it and sat down again, and who was observed by the whole house to be smiling at absolutely nothing. And in the long room at Harrowden, where his father had kept the guns, there stood 2 desks pushed end to end and lamps, and a great disorder of maps and school rules and returns, and there most nights a schoolmaster's daughter wrote the truth about England with her cap crooked and her feet on the fender, and the Duke of Harrowden, who had gone looking for a stranger to tell him what he had not seen, would put down his pen and look across 2 feet of walnut at his wife, and think, with a gratitude that never once wore thin in 40 years, that she had been sitting in the corner of the room the whole time. He had only to look. He looked, now every day of his life, and every day of his life she caught him at it, and lifted her head, and gave him the dimple, and did not put it away.